Hey there, fellow creators. Ben here from Cinder Studios. And you know, one of the barriers that I think keeps a lot of people from exploring painting in a more professional level can be brushes. Brushes, as soon as you graduate out of the cheap brush packs or dollar store bargain basement brushes, you start getting brushes that are 5, 10, 15, 20, 20, 30, 40, $50 per individual brush. And that can get really expensive very quickly, especially if you're trying to flesh out an entire working set with brushes that are that expensive. That seems crazy. But you know, brushes are not the only way of painting. So here are 5 different ways you can ditch the brush and still paint. Stick around. Okay, so as I just said, there are a lot of different ways that you can paint and never have to pick up an actual brush itself. There are alternatives you can do that, like, I can't afford that really expensive brush, or even the pack of brushes. I'd spend all this money on the paint and not have to buy brushes too? Like, what do I do? Well, there's a lot cheaper options out there. First one of these is your painting knives. Painting knives and knife painting in general is a classic technique, usually used alongside brushes, but there's no reason why you can't just use the knife. There's actually a number of artists that I've seen who develop entire styles just by really intricate knife work. And obviously you don't use the one knife, you get, you know, different shapes and different trowels and different things like that to really be able to get you a different variety of strokes without ever really needing to be like, oh, well, I gotta do this and clean the brush. And honestly, I would say between oil and acrylic, knives are actually a great way to work with oil paint, especially if you're worried about like solvents or anything like that. Just ditch the brushes entirely. You don't need the solvents. You might need a little bit of solvents just to clean the knife. But other than that, just use the knife, spread the paint around, make a painting. The second way to paint without a brush is to use sponges. Now, this is a nice little sliver that I sliced off of a, just regular utility sponge. Obviously, you're going to be cleaning it in between loads of paint and things like that. There are also cheaper options out there, like these sponges on a stick. These are usually like maybe $2 a piece at your local craft store. And again, I mean, don't let paint sit in them real long. They're going to absorb a lot more water, so you maybe aren't painting with thick, heavy impasto brush work or sponge work in this case. But you can absolutely do quite a lot of stuff with a variety of sponges, both like this, as well as just little ones that you find at the dollar store, slice up into different shapes, and be able to paint with those. The third technique is something that I think a lot of artists overlook because it seems wasteful, and it kind of is wasteful, but that is just to take the tube itself, unscrew the cap, and just start squeezing the paint onto the surface. Obviously, this will not yield you a very realistic result unless you're probably painting on a much larger scale. But in addition to smushing that out directly on the tube onto your surface, you can then, use your thumb, your fingers to blend that out. Important to have those tools at your fingertips, and this is literally just having a tool at your literal fingertips. The fourth option is probably technically not any less expensive than brushes long term, well, short term rather, because it's the color shapers. The brush company Princeton makes this product under their sub-brand Catalyst, which is essentially a little rubber spatula on the end of a handle. The great thing about these is, unlike brushes that will splay and deteriorate and eventually have paint that gets hard into them and ruined over the course of time, especially if you don't take care of your brushes, these don't have that problem. They're rubber. The paint will just peel right off once it dries, giving you essentially an infinite working tool, and once you have a set of these, you never have to buy brushes or these ever again. Another interesting thing about the color shapers is that while they do act in a similar way to painting with a palette knife would be, the rubberness and flexibility of this really allows you to paint without brush strokes. A lot of people are like, how do I completely eliminate brush strokes but not eliminate texture? Well, these things. And the fifth and final way to paint without a brush is to change the viscosity of the paint you're working with. Obviously, if you're coming out of a tube, for whether that be acrylic paint or oil paint, the paint's going to be thick. Now, that isn't necessarily a bad thing in the grand scheme of things, but there are other viscosities of paint. There are, ink-like paints that you can use with dip pens, and then you have dip pens, you don't need a brush. Companies like R&F make pigment sticks or oil sticks, which with a little bit of friction reactivates the paint, and you can do all kind of really cool things with these without a knife, without a brush, and just directly on your surface. And of course, I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't, at least vaguely in passing, mention paint pouring. There's pouring medium, which is a liquid acrylic medium designed to take thicker and even sometimes thinner paints, get them into a point where they are a smooth, resinous pour with enough viscosity to keep it together, but not enough that it just runs all over the place. And paint pouring is a pretty big trend right now. A lot of people are doing paint pouring. Well, you don't need a brush for that. So while I personally will not be swearing off brushes anytime soon, I like what brushes can do, both in the highly versatile sense as well as the different textures and ways you can apply paint with a brush. I think are pretty endless once you have a fairly basic set of, I would say, 5 styles of brushes you can do just about anything. But I think it's always important as artists to explore non-traditional methods as well. Whether that be picking up a tube and just squeezing it right onto your canvas, or picking something up that maybe can hold a little bit of paint like a sponge and just smear that around. I think mixing and matching different techniques into what you may already do with a brush can be a really valuable thing to add new and interesting looks, textures, and feels and visual elements to your piece without having to necessarily completely relearn a new technique or style, or even to learn a new way of painting in the sense that you have to completely start from the ground up. It's like, no, just supplement in a little bit and add a little extra variety into your work. But what about you guys? Have you ever used something other than a brush, and probably I would say other than a palette knife, to paint on a regular basis? If so, let me know in comments below, as well as if there's anything that you've ever used that isn't one of these things that really has been a obvious change in difference in how you paint. Also, I mean, spray paint's probably in there too in terms of viscosities and things, but what have you used that's been very non-standard, and how can we learn to explore those together? So yeah, that stuff in comments. As always, if you enjoyed this art video, go ahead and hit the like button, get subscribed if you're not already. Check me out in socials in the description box below, including the community Discord, my own website, where you can sign up to my newsletter to get cool, inspiring stuff that's not in video form. And this has been reminding you to keep on creating, and I will see you guys next time. I almost had, that was not quite coherent, but it was pretty close.